Have you ever been surrounded by people smiling, talking, sharing stories, and still felt like you didn't belong? Like everyone was dancing to music you couldn't hear, speaking a language that somehow used the same words but meant something entirely different? Maybe you've sat at the dinner table, laughed at the right moments, nodded at familiar stories, and yet deep inside you felt miles away. Not sad, not angry, just detached. As if your soul was watching the scene from behind a glass wall. If that sounds like you, you're not broken. You're not failing to connect. You're simply not meant to fit in. It's not that you can't fit in. You've probably tried. You've adjusted your voice, your rhythm, your interests, just enough to make others comfortable. You've smiled through conversations that felt like noise. You've walked into rooms and left parts of yourself at the door, hoping someone would recognize what you didn't say. But still, no matter how much you bend, something inside you stays firm. Quietly, persistently, it whispers, "This isn't it." And that whisper, it's not weakness. It's a sign. Because while the world praises those who blend in, those who adapt, those who wear the right face at the right time, there are some of us who were never meant to be part of that performance. Some of us are not here to play along. We're here to break the pattern. You might feel like an outsider, like you're walking a path no one else sees, like your mind speaks in metaphors when others want bullet points. That isn't a defect, it's your direction. You weren't designed to disappear into the crowd. You were shaped by something deeper, something ancient, something sacred. So today, we're going to explore 6 signs that you're not meant to fit in, not because you're flawed, but because you're called. You're not here to be one of many. You're here to become fully yourself. And that journey starts with one truth. Feeling out of place may be the clearest sign that you've finally begun to come home to you. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who the world told you to be, not who your family needed, not who your friends expected, who you are beneath the masks, beyond the roles, outside the scripts." He called it individuation, not just self-improvement, not just healing. Individuation is the sacred, often painful process of becoming whole. It's the unfolding of the soul, the meeting of the conscious with the unconscious, the integration of shadow and light. And here's the part they don't tell you, it doesn't happen in a crowd. It doesn't happen when you're trying to be liked, approved, or accepted. It happens in silence, in solitude, in the moments when you feel like a misfit and stop apologizing for it. Because the truth is, becoming yourself often means losing the version of you that fit in, the version that said yes to stay safe, the version that performed to be loved. Jung understood that the more you walk toward your true nature, the more you naturally walk away from what's popular, easy, or familiar. It's not rebellion, it's realignment. You start to realize that most people aren't living, they're replicating, following inherited scripts, playing characters they didn't choose. But you're called to something different, not because you're better, but because your soul refuses to sleep. That discomfort you feel in ordinary spaces isn't dysfunction, it's evidence. It's proof that your inner world is waking up. The tension between who you are and who you're told to be, that's the very friction that births awareness. And that's why fitting in starts to feel like shrinking, like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. No matter how shiny they are, they hurt with every step. Individuation is taking them off. Walking barefoot if you must. Learning to trust your path, even if no one else sees it. So if you've ever wondered why you feel so different, so distant, so out of sync, it might be because you're finally syncing with yourself. Jung didn't promise it would be easy. But he knew this much. Wholeness isn't found in belonging to others. It's found in returning to the person you were always meant to be. And that journey is just beginning. There's a moment in life when you stop nodding, when you hear the same stories, the same rules, the same, "This is just how it is," and something inside you quietly whispers, "But why?" It's not rebellion for the sake of noise, it's curiosity, a kind of deeper awareness waking up inside you, a refusal to accept things just because that's what everyone does. Maybe it started early. You couldn't help but notice the contradictions, the way people preached kindness but practiced exclusion, the way tradition was used as a shield to avoid change. While others followed the script, you asked questions. And not the convenient kind. You asked the ones that made people uncomfortable, the ones that peeled back the curtain. And over time, you realized something vital. Most people aren't thinking, they're repeating. Carl Jung believed that becoming conscious is the rarest and most powerful act a person can choose. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people are living out inherited patterns, beliefs passed down like old furniture, a dusty, heavy, unexamined. But you're not at peace with just accepting. You need to understand. You need it to make sense in your bones. That's not arrogance. That's awakening. You question not because you want to tear things down, but because you want to build something real, something honest, something that actually fits. You're not trying to be difficult. You're trying to be aligned. And yet, your questions are often met with blank stares, polite nods, or subtle dismissals. Because when you refuse to sleepwalk through life, you challenge others to wake up too. Not everyone is ready for that. But you are. So if you've ever felt like you're the only one asking, why don't silence yourself? That question might be the exact spark that leads you out of imitation and into awareness. You weren't made to blindly accept. You were made to see. And seeing changes everything. It's not that you don't like people. You do. You love them even. But there's a certain kind of conversation, a certain kind of interaction that leaves you feeling more alone than being by yourself ever could. You've been in rooms full of laughter and still felt unseen. You've smiled through conversations about weather, gossip, or whatever show everyone's watching, but your soul felt like it was knocking from the inside, asking, "Is this all there is?" Because while the world runs on noise, you crave substance. It's not about being antisocial. It's about being selectively social. You want to talk about what's real. You want to hear what someone actually feels when they wake up, what they're afraid of, what they've lost, what they dream about when no one's watching. You're not here to collect people, you're here to connect. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And maybe that's why most conversations feel like performances. Everyone pretending, posturing, protecting. But you're tired of masks. You want presence. You want the pause between words. You want to feel someone's truth, even if it's messy. You've probably been called too intense or told to lighten up. But shallow isn't your language. You were never meant to stay at the surface. And because of that, you often walk alone, not because you're cold, but because too many spaces lack warmth. It's not that you don't know how to play the game. You do. You've played it well. But every time you do, it costs you a piece of yourself. And now, you're done with that cost. You'd rather be quiet with someone who feels than loud with people who perform. So if you leave gatherings feeling drained instead of energized, if you've been told you're too deep for casual conversation, if silence with someone feels more intimate than hours of talk, then know this: you're not broken. You're tuned differently. And while it may be lonely at times, that depth is your gift. A soul that craves truth will never feel full on surface-level noise. So keep seeking those who don't just speak but see. Because when you finally meet them, you'll realize you were never too much. You were just waiting for someone who could meet you where you truly are. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from feeling like you're not from here, like your heart was dropped into a world that doesn't quite speak your language. Even as a child, you knew it. You sensed things others didn't. You saw beyond what was said. You felt what others denied. While other kids played with ease, you asked big questions. While others blended in, you stood out quietly, awkwardly, unavoidably. And you tried, didn't you? You mimicked their movements. You laughed when they laughed. You wore the right shoes, said the right things, nodded at the right time. But no matter how hard you worked to belong, something inside you stayed untouched, as if a part of you refused to be edited. That part is still with you. Carl Jung wrote that the unconscious resists conformity when the soul seeks truth. And maybe that's why no matter how much you've tried to adapt, something always pulls you back. Not out of defiance, but out of alignment. You weren't meant to disappear into the crowd. You were meant to remember who you are. This sense of otherness isn't a curse, it's a compass. It's the subtle signal that your path was never meant to be paved by others. It's the feeling that wakes you up in the middle of an ordinary life and whispers, "There's more than this." And yes, it's isolating. You sit in rooms and feel miles away. You speak and wonder if anyone truly hears you. But that doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're awake. You don't crave approval. You crave truth. You don't follow trends. You follow threads, the ones that pull you deeper into your own soul. So if you've always felt like you didn't quite belong, that you're not wired the same way, that you're orbiting something unseen, honor that. You didn't come here to conform. You came here to remember, to awaken, to be whole. You are not here to fit in. You're here to be real, even if that means standing alone. There's something about the mainstream that never appealed to you. The checklist, life, the job, the title, the house, the carrot, never felt like yours. You watched others chase it with urgency, with pride, with certainty, and yet for you, none of it landed. None of it felt like home. Not because you're lazy, not because you're lost, but because your soul isn't interested in imitation, it's interested in meaning. While others climbed ladders, you wandered paths. While others chased validation, you chased presence. You were the one reading old books instead of watching trends. The one dreaming in metaphors, sketching the unseen, hearing silence like it had a message. You felt most alive in stillness, in nature, in questions no one dared to ask. You didn't crave the spotlight. You craved depth. Jung would say this is individuation in motion, the slow, often solitary process of becoming uniquely yourself. And that kind of becoming almost always leads you away from what's conventional. Because the soul doesn't bloom in comparison, it blooms in authenticity. You've probably been misunderstood, called impractical, unrealistic, dramatic. People wonder why you can't just follow the plan, settle down, be normal. But what they don't see is that what they call normal feels like a cage to you. Not because you reject structure, but because you refuse to shrink. The things that call to you solitude, spiritual paths, healing, art, mysticism, they're not distractions, they're directions. They're how your inner world communicates with you. They're the places you feel most aligned, most alive, most whole. And no, it won't make sense to everyone, but it doesn't have to. Because the moment you stop chasing what society told you should matter and start honoring what actually matters to your soul, everything changes. Peace replaces pressure, depth replaces distraction, truth replaces noise. So if you've always felt drawn to what others avoid, if you find beauty in what most overlook, if your life looks more like a poem than a plan, trust that. The unconventional isn't your detour, it's your design. You weren't made to follow the map. You were made to make one. You've never been the kind of person to rebel just to make noise. You don't need to prove anything. You don't thrive on conflict. But when someone in power speaks with emptiness, when rules are enforced without soul, when obedience is demanded instead of earned, that's when something inside you rises. Quietly, firmly, undeniably. You can't explain it, but your body knows the difference. Between true leadership and hollow control, between guidance and manipulation, between integrity and performance. In school, maybe you questioned the teacher not out of arrogance, but because the answer didn't satisfy your hunger for truth. At home, maybe you sensed when the rules had more to do with fear than with love. At work, you've sat in meetings where words filled the air, but no one said what mattered. And every time, something in you pulled back, not out of defiance, but out of alignment. Carl Jung spoke of the inner authority, the self that emerges when we begin to live in congruence with our deepest truth. And when that voice grows stronger, the false ones around you start to echo. They lose their grip. You don't bow just because you're told to. You bow only when something sacred asks for it. That's why forced obedience never sat right with you. Why chain of command felt like a game. Because you don't follow for comfort, you follow for truth. And when truth is missing, your soul resists 7 if your voice stays quiet. You've probably been called difficult, non-compliant, hard to manage. But those labels come from systems that want compliance, not consciousness. Systems that reward silence over awareness. But you weren't made to nod at what feels wrong. You were made to question it, to hold it up to the light, to ask, does this align with who I am? That's not rebellion. That's responsibility. The responsibility to stay loyal to yourself, even when it costs you favor, comfort, or approval. So if you've always felt that unease with performative authority, if you've walked away from places that demanded your silence, don't doubt yourself. That tension you feel is your inner compass, and it's pointing you towards something real. You didn't mean to drift away. You didn't wake up one day and choose to become distant. But as you started to grow, to shed old skin, to ask deeper questions, something happened. The people around you began to fade. Conversations became harder. Connections felt strained. And little by little you realized, the more you became yourself, the more you were asked silently, subtly to stop. You were told you changed, that you weren't as fun, as agreeable, as easy to predict. You were called intense, emotional, too much. But no one saw that what they called too much was really more of you finally showing up. You didn't become bigger, you just stopped shrinking. Jung understood this rupture. Individuation, he taught, doesn't just separate you from your own shadow, it separates you from the collective. Because when you choose wholeness, you lose the comfort of camouflage. You become visible. And being visible makes people uncomfortable, especially when they're still hiding. So yes, your growth cost you belonging, but the belonging it cost you was based on a version of you that was only half alive. The version that made herself smaller to fit the space. That bit her tongue. That nodded when her soul screamed. That version died the day you realized that peace was more important than permission. Now you speak more honestly, you take up more space, you sit in silence instead of forcing smiles. And some people can't handle that. They miss the you who edited herself. But you don't. Because you've tasted what it means to belong to yourself. And no friendship, no tradition, no circle of comfort is worth trading that away. Not anymore. So, if you've lost people along the way, if you've had to walk away from places that no longer saw you, don't grieve the loss of belonging. Celebrate the gain of becoming. The ones who can meet you here without needing you to dim those are your people, and even if they are few, they are real. Growth is rarely loud, but it is always honest. And honesty always rearranges the room. Let's be honest, this path isn't easy. There's a weight that comes with being different. A heaviness most don't see because you carry it so quietly. Not fitting in might sound poetic from the outside, but on the inside, it often feels like exile. Like being in a crowded room where no one hears the language your soul is speaking. Like reaching out in all directions and still coming back empty. It starts subtly. You notice the pauses in conversation when you speak your truth. The way people change the subject when you go too deep. The way your silence makes others nervous. And soon, without realizing it, you begin to question yourself. Am I too much? Am I too strange? Am I the problem? You're not. But the doubt is real, the confusion is real, the loneliness it carves into you, because we're wired to want connection, to crave being seen. And when you're met with misunderstanding instead, it leaves bruises that don't show. Carl Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." And that's the wound, isn't it? It's not the lack of company. It's the lack of resonance. You can talk all day, but if no one hears what matters, you start to feel invisible. This isn't about being superior. It's not about looking down on the world. It's about difference, a quiet, sacred difference, and that difference often isolates you before it frees you. So yes, not fitting in hurts. It hurts in the places that long to be known. It hurts in the silence after you've told your truth and been met with discomfort. But that pain is also the signpost. It means you're not asleep. It means your soul is alive enough to ache. And that ache, it's not a flaw, it's a message. You're not broken, you're becoming. Here's what they never told you. The parts of you that feel strange to others, the intensity, the sensitivity, the depth, the questions, those are not problems, they're pointers. They're guiding you towards something most people spend a lifetime avoiding, awakening. You feel deeply, not by accident, but by design. Your heart wasn't built for autopilot, it was built to notice, to feel everything. The energy in a room, the sadness behind a smile, the truth hiding behind polite conversation. You don't just walk through the world, you absorb it. And yes, that can be exhausting, but it's also sacred. You were never meant to sleepwalk through life. You were meant to awaken, to see what others ignore, to hear what others drown out, to call out what others politely avoid. Your discomfort in fitting in is not dysfunction, it's a signal, a sign that your soul is allergic to pretending. Jung understood this. He didn't teach us to become like everyone else. He taught us to become whole. And wholeness doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from facing yourself fully. From reclaiming the pieces you hid to be accepted. From learning that your difference is not a defect, it's a direction. You notice more because you're built to witness. You care more because you're here to heal. You stand apart not to be seen, but to see clearly. And in a world addicted to conformity, that clarity makes you dangerous in the best possible way. So if you've ever cursed your sensitivity, your solitude, your sense of otherness, pause. What you're feeling isn't brokenness, it's brilliance. The misfit isn't lost. The misfit is called to be something real in a world full of performances. Your depth isn't an accident. It's your invitation. And your difference, it's the map you were born with. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow not as something evil, but as something hidden, the parts of ourselves we silence, repress, deny, and often we don't bury them out of malice, we bury them to belong. You weren't born afraid to speak your truth. You learned that truth made people uncomfortable. You weren't born ashamed of your passions, your depth, your voice. You were taught quietly, consistently, that some parts of you were too much. So you dimmed, you softened, you reshaped your edges to fit into the mold. And every time you did, something sacred slipped into the dark. That's the shadow. It's not the worst in you, it's the most hidden in you. It's your power, your creativity, your rage, your intuition, everything that didn't feel acceptable in the eyes of the world. You didn't lose those parts. They're still there. But you can't access them while you're busy performing. And performance is what conformity requires. It offers safety, predictability, praise. But the price is steep. Conformity creates comfort but kills the soul. It invites you to survive, not to live. It tells you who to be, how to act, what to want, but never asks what your spirit actually needs. And the worst part? The more you pretend to belong, the more lost you feel. Because deep down you know every time you hide your truth you move further from yourself. You don't need to fit in. You need to reclaim the parts of you that were cast into the shadow. The rawness, the instinct, the fire, the soul that refused to shrink quietly. Because the shadow doesn't go away, it waits. And when you're ready to stop performing, it will meet you not with judgment, but with power. Individuation is a long word for something deeply human, the journey of becoming who you already are. Not the version you were taught to be, not the persona you crafted to survive, but the self that existed before the world told you who to become. Carl Jung called individuation the process of integrating all the parts of you, your light, your shadow, your conscious choices and unconscious patterns into a single, aligned whole. It's not about adding more. It's about unearthing what's been buried. It's about remembering. But here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Individuation is not glamorous. It's not polished. It's not easy. It's raw, lonely, disorienting. Because in order to find yourself, you often have to lose everything that isn't real. You start to question relationships that once felt solid. You step away from paths that used to give you purpose. You wake up in the middle of your life and realize the things you chased no longer feed you. And the world around you doesn't understand. You're not fun anymore. You're not predictable. You've gone too quiet, too deep, too far. But the deeper you go, the more you begin to touch something real. Not the surface-level version of life, the truth of it. The rhythm of your own being, the knowing that doesn't shout, but hums. The self that doesn't seek attention, it seeks alignment. Individuation isn't becoming different. It's becoming true. It's taking all the scattered pieces, childhood pain, ancestral wounds, untapped gifts, and weaving them into one voice, your voice. And yes, it's lonely, but it's a sacred kind of loneliness. The kind that builds a bridge between who you were and who you were always meant to be. So, if you feel lost in this in-between space, if the old world is fading and the new one hasn't appeared yet, breathe. You're not falling apart. You're coming home. It might not feel like it, but your difference is doing something powerful. Even when you're quiet, even when you're unsure, even when it feels like you're standing alone in a world that doesn't quite make room for who you are. Because here's the truth, systems don't change from the inside. They change because someone stood outside of them and refused to pretend. The nonconformist, the artist, the healer, the wanderer, the soul who doesn't just follow the map, they draw their own. You don't break things with violence, you break them with truth, with presence, with the refusal to keep playing a game that makes everyone lose themselves. You don't even have to raise your voice. Just being real in a world obsessed with imitation is enough to make people pause, to question, to wake up. And yes, it comes with a cost. You lose comfort, you lose applause, you lose the illusion of belonging. But what you gain, clarity, peace, sovereignty, is worth everything. Carl Jung understood this. He didn't call us to fit in, he called us to individuate, to peel away the false layers and live in alignment with our own truth. And when you do that, even quietly, you begin to shift the field. You give others permission to do the same. The world doesn't need more followers. It needs guides, witnesses, truth-tellers. People brave enough to live their own answers instead of memorizing someone else's. You don't have to lead a movement to make a difference. Sometimes the most radical act is choosing to be yourself fully in your home, in your relationships, in your silence. So, if you've ever wondered if it matters that you think differently, feel more deeply, see what others ignore, let this be your reminder. Yes, it matters. Not because you're better, but because you're awake, and the world is starving for people who are. For most of your life, you were taught that belonging meant fitting in, shaping yourself into a version that was digestible, likable, predictable. You learned how to soften your edges, hide your depth, wear the uniform of sameness just to feel a little less alone. But deep down, something always felt off, like you were borrowing someone else's life, like you had to trade honesty for acceptance. And the more you tried to fit in, the more invisible you became. That's because true belonging has nothing to do with fitting in. Fitting in is about editing yourself. Belonging is about revealing yourself. You're not here to find a tribe that makes you shrink just to feel safe. You're here to create a tribe where your fullness is welcomed, where your silence is heard, your fire is honored, your truth is not just tolerated, but celebrated. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's what real belonging demands, radical self-acceptance. And then the courage to bring that self into the world, unfiltered. Belonging isn't about finding people who are just like you. It's about finding people who can hold space for your difference and still stay close. It's not found in sameness, it's found in resonance. You don't need everyone, you need alignment. Even one person who sees you in your rawness is worth more than 1,000 who only see your mask. So if you've been trying to force yourself into rooms that drain you, trying to win approval from people who only like the edited version of you, pause. That's not belonging. That's bargaining. And you are no longer for sale. You didn't come here to fit into someone else's story. You came here to write your own and invite others who are brave enough to do the same. You've spent enough time wondering what's wrong with you, enough time doubting your depth, questioning your quiet, apologizing for your truth. But now you know what made you feel out of place was never a flaw. It was the first sign of awakening. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to become. There's a kind of power that lives in those who've walked the long, lonely road back to themselves. A soft, steady power. One that doesn't demand attention, but shifts the room without saying a word. And that power is already inside you. It always was. It just got buried beneath the noise of expectations, roles, and the pressure to perform. So if this message stirred something in you, if it felt less like new information and more like remembering, take a deep breath, you're not broken. You're becoming whole, becoming real, becoming the version of you that never needed to earn love by hiding. Honor that difference. Don't run from it. Don't dilute it. Let it guide you. Let it shape the life you were born to live, not the one you were pressured to accept. Because every time you choose truth over approval, alignment over performance, solitude over superficiality, you return to yourself. You don't have to explain your path to anyone. You just have to walk it. And trust that the right people, the ones who speak your language without needing translation, will find you not in the crowd, but in the quiet. If this message resonated, if it woke something up inside you, type "aligned" in the comments. Not just for me, for you, as a declaration, a quiet promise to stay loyal to what's real in you. And if this felt like coming home, like hearing the words you've needed for years, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, like it, subscribe. But more importantly, stay true. Because the world doesn't need more people who fit in. It needs more people brave enough to become who they really are. And that's you. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.